Alright, so we're here at my kids' school and they've got these raised beds and they're not having the results they'd like with them, so they asked me to come in and see what I could do to help them out. The soil that is in the beds is garden center soil and it's mostly just sand. So have a look at it here. There's some organic matter in there, but it's primarily sand. So not an ideal growing medium, and certainly doesn't hang on to water very well. So the plan was to come in here and take all the soil out and turn these raised beds into Hugelkultur beds. For those that are not aware of what Hugelkultur is all about, it's mounds of earth that are piled on top of rotten logs and other decaying plant matter. And it seems like the ideal solution to many of the problems that are associated with raised beds, because one of the problems with raised beds is that they're up in the air and the water drains out of them. The water tends to be down on the ground, and if you've got a raised bed, the water's going to drain out of them. A little section here on how to use a shovel properly. All shovels have a little flange that you can kick down the way I'm doing with my foot there. And if you do it this way, you can shovel all day. If you pick a pace that you can handle, pace that you can manage. If you do it this way, you're using the shovel the way it's designed to be used. Bend at the knees, lift, kick it down, bend at the knees, lift, kick down, bend at the knees, lift, and so on. That's how you use a shovel without getting exhausted. Now in a second here I'm going to show you how most people use a shovel. It's the way like a 20-year-old guy would use a shovel. Just raw power, no thinking about preserving your back or whatever. Okay, so now here we go. This is how most people use a shovel. So you can see I'm just flying here and really getting a lot done. The difference is that if you shoveled like this for an hour, that would be all the shoveling you'd do that day. You would have nothing left. So it's better to use that kick lift approach. Okay, so here we are. Another thing that I found in this bed was that it had a real it's not a bad not the best camera angle, but colt's foot. There was a colt's foot weed in the bed. That's the colt's foot flower. Colt's foot flowers in the spring, and then first thing it does is flower, and then the leaves come out after the flowers. But it has these huge rhizomes that go everywhere, and they tend to like edges. You see how they're sort of hugging the sides of the bed? So since I was in there digging this all up, I thought I'd try to get all of those colt's foot rhizomes out, because we don't want to be growing colt's foot in there. We want to grow beans and potatoes and tomatoes or whatever they want to grow there. They have some sort of gardening program at the school, so I thought I'd do whatever I could to get that colt's foot out. But it tends to have an affinity for sides and edges and logs and any sort of structure like that. It's going to hug towards it. And I did everything I could to get it out, but I'm sure there's still some in there. They're just going to have to keep picking at it as they go. So here we got the bed all emptied out, and now it's time to throw some rotten wood in there. So I got some logs from the woods right next to the school, and these are just half rotted logs. They're some of them are kind of punky. You could break them or smash them down or whatever. But the idea is you throw these in the bottom and they'll rot out and they'll absorb water, and they'll also create an ideal habitat or environment for all the living organisms that improve the soil on their own. That one didn't fit, so I'd smash that down and get that in there. But all of this stuff, it feeds the worms and it feeds all the different microorganisms that benefit and improve the soil. So it also retains water. So it's an ideal way to improve a raised bed and put the, take advantage of the fact that it's a raised bed by putting something in the bottom that is going to create an environment that's favorable to organisms that will improve the soil. There was some bushes in the same area that I had to prune. So instead of having to bundle those up and throw them out at the side of the road, I just threw them in the hugelkultur bed, because again, that's more organic matter for the organisms in the soil to break down. So now you see I'm putting all this soil back in there. In another area, in that gardening area, there was a bunch of weeds that I pulled up, and sod and stuff like that. I threw those in there. I try to put the sod upside down as best as you can, but all of that stuff is going to break down and feed the worms and feed the other microorganisms in the soil, and over time create an environment that is favorable to mycorrhizae and that sort of stuff, all the things that benefit soil. And I'm anticipating much greater water retention. They also had a compost station at the school, and there was a bunch of compost in there. The soil that was in the bed prior to my digging it up had very few worms in it. Very, very few worms. So another indication that the system in that bed wasn't doing very well. There were not a lot of worms, meaning there's not a lot for worms to eat. And also, if there's not a lot of worm activity, there's not a lot of the nutrients that the worms provide for the soil. So we don't want that. We want to create an environment that's really favorable to worms. So this compost had a good number of worms in it, and probably had lots of other good stuff in it. So I threw that in there to give it a bit of a boost. I did this to every single one of the beds in this garden. It was a little bit labor intensive, but anyway. Wherever I could, I added the compost to the soil. And I try to spread it out a little bit so that it's distributed evenly throughout the soil. But that's the general approach. And then I put some more of the original soil, the soil that I removed, I threw that back in. Whenever you do this, the soil that you take out, you never get all the soil you took out back in. I had to find other places to use the original soil because there was just there was more soil than there wasn't enough room to put the soil back. The soil I took out did not all go back in. I had to put it in other places in the area. Anyway, so here we are. I was trying to just work it in a little bit, make sure it's evenly distributed. I jumped on it a little bit to try to get it nestled down around the logs and branches and all that sort of stuff. Not too much. You don't want to, overly compact it or whatever, but I definitely didn't want huge air pockets, because I didn't want the soil to behave in any way that was unpredictable going forward. Here I threw another wheelbarrow full of compost onto the soil just to improve it, increase the amount of organic matter in the soil, improve the composition of the soil so it wasn't to the same extent full of all that sandy stuff. I just sort of spread that around a little bit. There's some the good thing about adding all that stuff is that there's all kinds of organic matter in it, right? All those leaves and sticks and old, roots, not roots from invasive weeds, but just roots from previous plants that are going to break down and feed the soil and feed the organisms in the soil. And here I am just throwing one final layer of the original soil that I took off on top to get it finished. And when I finish all of this, it's level with the top, but of course I just put it all in there, so it's gonna go down a couple inches after a couple good rains, and then once they've got some plants growing in there, we'll put a good mulch on there. Any Hugelkultur bed, you want to mulch on top. So even though the way I'm leaving this finished today, as you see, there's no mulch on top. There will be a mulch eventually, because we want the garden to retain water. We want the garden to be an environment that's favorable to beneficials, especially worms, and we want them to be happy. So here I am, just smoothing it off and trying to make it look nice so that all the teachers are happy with it. Again, this is the garden at my kids' school, and I just offered to do a little work there to improve their gardens and optimize the gardening space that they had for their students. They to some extent, as part of their curriculum, for some of their classes anyway, they have gardening units that they do with their students, which I think is just a great idea. And so it was wonderful to be a part of that whole process, and to help them out in what small way I could. I spent a few days there, and just hopefully the gardens are better off for it. All right, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.